I finish off a series on money. So if you're new to Crosswalk, you're like, oh man, we got to hear about money today, which could be a very bad thing. But I really think that particularly if you're newer to Crosswalk and you're wondering about who we are, it's actually maybe one of the best services to come to, because you get our ethos and hopefully be able to share some ways of thinking about our relationship with money that may be a little different than you've heard in churches in the past. And so let me just start by saying the obvious, which is I hate talking about this. And one of the reasons I hate talking about this is because of how awful this subject is for so many people, because it's been handled so awfully for so many of us in so many churches. And I have to add myself to that list, because in my earliest years here, I didn't do a great job with it, and I was it's where I was. I'm not where I was. I'm where I am and growing, hopefully. But I'm embarrassed about how I talked about money in ways that are more common in churches, and so but the church didn't fire me yet, so that's a good thing. And so I hope to reframe some things and hopefully course correct some stuff and give some ethos to some things. And the fact of the matter is, there's an undeniable thing about the Bible. The number one subject in the entire Bible. Steve and I were talking about this just before service. He was at the early service, so I bent his ear for a moment, just said, hey man, any glaring fouls from the first service? And couldn't really think of any, but he remembered that a number of years ago, I gave a statistic, and it's along these lines, that there are approximately 31,000 verses in the Bible. And of those 31,000, over 2,000 of those deal with what we do with our money, our stuff. Largely, it is in relationship to the poor. And what do we do to help people around us? And so this is a whopper subject. It's the biggest subject in the Bible, other than God. I mean, God is the subject, really, of the whole thing. But in terms of our relationship, understanding of God, and the rubber meeting the road, the biggest thing that it's talking about is what we do for other people with our stuff. And so hopefully today I can wrap this and we can all feel a little better about it, and it won't be too painful, but you never know. So let's see what we've got. So, one of the first verses I want to share with you is one that has been used really poorly in churches. And so let's just hit it. This is a teaching of Jesus. He's in Jerusalem near the temple. So Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. If you grew up in the church, this was called the widow's mite. And it was like half of a coin, really. I mean, it was the lowest possible amount anybody could give. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. Now, what you need to know here, and this is where it gets a little weird, is Jesus was frustrated here. He wasn't pleased. He wasn't lifting her up as a heroine. Actually, he was very frustrated at what he was seeing unfold. It's not that he wasn't honoring of her and offering her offering, because that's there, but he understood the fuller context at what was at play here. Here's what was happening. This widow was completely reliant on the temple. She had nothing. She lost her husband, probably had lost her children, so her son would have been the one to provide for her, and we have no mention of that, so she is completely dependent on the temple. The temple is her Social Security provider. Think about it that way. It is her only source of means. And what she's being asked to do is to take everything she's got left and dump it into the temple treasury. Now, she does it out of faithfulness and obligation. Honestly, this is such a small amount that probably the temple didn't even notice it. And so there's this tension here. Yeah, we celebrate her faithfulness, and yet that is not really what Jesus is getting at, because what Jesus is really wanting to say and does in other places is, I think he's looking at the situation just thinking, if I could just speak into this, I'd want to tell all those people who had a whole lot more money to give her $5, give her $10, give her $100, because she can't make it on anything. And I'd want to go tell this widow, if I could right now, I'd want to say, keep your half shekel. Keep it. Buy yourself a muffin or something. Do something special, or even put food on the table. Because you should. Because you don't even have enough, and you wouldn't be saying this in any kind of disparaging way, but you don't have enough to meet your most basic needs. Don't put that in the coffer. And I would say that to you, that if you are struggling to get food on the table to meet your very basic needs as a human being in our time right now, save your money. In fact, I'd go the other direction. I'd say, let us help you. See me after and let me load you up with groceries so you have a little more money, so that you can take care of the basic needs. Because the last thing Jesus would ever do would be to be okay with the poorest of the poor not having anything, while people who have plenty just walk by. It's almost like they're working on a fair share principle that's not fair at all. Does that make any sense at all? So this particular passage, though, has been used to kind of guilt and shame people over time. Like, well, you should give absolutely everything. Then if the widow did it with no understanding of context, that one, she probably didn't have a lot of choice, and two, it was wrong. It's not good. Not good. So we celebrate her faithfulness. Can you hear my tension in this? It's like, well, okay, we're not ripping on the widow, so don't hear that. But at the same time, realize that that's really not the focal point. And so we're called to do something more, and actually the more that we should be looking at has more to do with the other characters in the story who Jesus is not impressed by. A number of years ago when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, or governator, there was a thing on the radio. They were talking about his tax returns, and they had somebody see his most recent tax returns. And part of the report that they gave was what he gave to charitable contributions. And it was significant. It was deep into six figures as how much he gave to charitable contributions. In my head, I'm thinking it's like $250,000 or something, which is like, all right, that's great. But here's the thing. For Arnold Schwarzenegger, $250,000 is chump change. And I think he would probably be kind of along the lines here where Jesus would be kind of like, oh, hey, great, man. That $250,000 hopefully helped a lot of people. But really, I mean, is that it? Is that really the fullness then of how we think about our relationship with our stuff when we live in a world of need? Is that where we come from? So anyway, there's that story, and then there's another one that has been used to really smack people around, and this comes from the Old Testament. The context with this, by the way, is you have people living in luxury, and yet they're cheap toward the things of God, which are generally the things toward the poor and others. And so there's a question before this that shows up that the prophet brings up as if he's the voice of God. And he says, do you really think God is interested in sacrificing 10,000 bulls or goats or lambs or whatever? Is that the point? Does God love a good barbecue that much that, he wants that to happen? And he answers the question, no. And he answers it this way. He says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse so there will be enough food in my temple. Now the tithe here is a very specific word. It literally translates as tenth. And the idea is you would bring your first fruits, the first tenth of your income or whatever, your crop, and you would offer that back to the temple so the temple could do their work. And so that's what he's saying and that's an old code. I mean, it had been around forever. So he's just saying, do what you already know works. So bring that into the storehouse so there will be enough food in my temple. If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it. Put me to the test. And so, and this is where my error was, we encourage people to take the test, give it a shot. And this happens a lot, particularly now in prosperity gospel kinds of churches that are all about name it and claim it. And it's kind of framed like this. You're reading it right there in the Bible. God says, put me to the test. So come on, people, bring out your checkbooks. Let's give this thing a whirl and see what God does. And in some of those situations, you have churches that then grow very, very wealthy and buying Lear jets and mansions for the pastors and all that. And I'm not sure that that's exactly the intent of this whole thing. In fact, I'm sure it's not. The worst thing, though, here, and it's very subtle, but this exists in all of Christian orthodoxy. It's not how I ride and not how I teach here at Crosswalk. But what is also put in place here is an idea of transactionalism, that we do something for God, and then God must do something for us. And that exists, like I said, right in Christian orthodoxy. It's baked into our cake to think like that. Like that's the point of faith, is we do our part to get God to do God's part. So we do our part. I'm going to cut my check for 10%, God, because I'm counting on the promise. And then I'm counting on God to do God's part. But I hope you recognize that transactionalism is at its core antithetical to faith itself. That it's not the point that God is after. God is not interested in a transaction with us. God is interested in relationship with us that fosters everything in us, that heals everything in us. Now, contracts are great. I'm glad I have a contract with Comcast, so I get my internet and my cable and all that stuff. I'm glad I have a contract with my utility provider and my garbage company and lots of other contracts in my life. And there is a sort of implied contract with Lynn and I, as we've been married now for almost 27 years this Thursday, right? Yeah, that's pretty awesome, so that's cool. Which reminds me to tell Dara I will not be in the office on Thursday. So anyway, celebrating my anniversary with my wife. Anyway, but you know, we took vows 27 years ago, and that's a contract, kind of, it's a covenant. But honestly, that's not how our relationship works. And in fact, if your relationship is based on a contract like that, I'm guessing you have a lousy relationship. That it's not at the core of anybody's dream. In fact, there are times when relational contracts need to be reinstated, but it's only in the worst of situations. There's an author that writes about this and uses this in marriages that are just so broken, that they've grown so far apart and are not doing anything to foster a healthy relationship anymore, that he literally institutes a contract between the husband and the wife for a period of time just to get their heads back in the game, because they've forgotten what just the basics look like. But the contract was never meant to replace the relationship, which is the point of it all. And I think that's the point of this whole thing, is we're not after a transaction with God. And frankly, a lot of the church's message for many, many centuries now has been transactional. You say this, you believe this, you get that. And I just think that is way, way off of the very heartbeat of God. It's just not what it's about. What it's about is related to what Paul says to the church in Ephesus on the next slide. So he's in the middle of a discourse, and he just can't help himself. He has to say this. It's the coolest thing. He does this a couple times in Ephesians, and he just stops right where he is talking about whatever. He says this, I pray that God will empower you with inner strength through God's Spirit. Then Christ will make God's home in your hearts as you trust in God. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep God's love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. This, my friends, is what is supposed to motivate every expression of faith. Every expression. It's not supposed to be this contractual thing that's just about ethical living, but everything that we do is supposed to be animated, informed, vivified by this reality of the very Spirit of God who is always loving. Everything we do is really supposed to be response to God's love. It's why Augustine, one of the church fathers, said a very bold thing. He summed down Christian living to this: love God and do as you please. Yeah, that's right. Because if you are completely immersed in the love of God that God has for us, and if we understand that that love returned only adds to more love and never runs out, it only helps us more and more, then the things that we do are going to be motivated by that love itself. Do you see what I'm saying here? Now, sometimes we need, because of our upbringing in the world and the culture that we live in, the paradigms that we're given, not the ones that we ask for ourselves, we don't even know where to begin with what that looks like. So ethics and moral living, all that stuff really helps frame some things in and speeds things up. But here's the thing. If you never had any of that before you, and all you had was to build your life on the fact that you are deeply and profoundly loved, and that will never, ever change, and you really allowed that to mess with you and form you, you know what the product of your life would be? It would be lovely. It would be ethical, it would be life-giving, and it would be generous toward the rest of the world with what you have. That's where it's going, because that is the character and nature of God. So that's what Paul is hoping that we'll mess with, that because of this, we'll shift away from, I have to do this kind of a thing, I have to do all these different spiritual practices, away from the have to language to a get to language, like, oh, because of the love of God, because of God's presence, I get to do all these things. That's the hope that will be there, a whole different motivation. And this is something to meditate on. And the fact is that we meditate on money a lot, and not so much necessarily the love of God. Do you know that you meditate on money a lot? You didn't even know that you meditate on money regularly. I doubt if you're like holding a dollar bill in front of you, in the morning or something. Maybe you do. That's really weird. I hope you don't do that, but maybe you do. But Jesus knows that we meditate on money. He just uses a different word. He uses the word worry, because worry is an obsessive type of meditation. When we worry, we are meditating on a particular thing. So Jesus has something to say about that in the next few slides. He says, I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to eat or enough clothes to wear. For life is more than food, and your body more than clothing. Look at the ravens. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for God feeds them. And you are far more valuable to Him than any birds. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And if worry can't accomplish a little thing like that, what's the use of worrying over bigger things? And he continues. Look at the lilies and how they grow. That's why you have a lily on your bulletin today. They don't work or make their clothing. Yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. If you're kind of new to the whole Christian thing and the history, Solomon was the third king of Israel. He was the son of King David. And he is in the top 10 wealthiest global leaders of all time. He's not at the top, but he's way up on the list as having crazy amounts of opulence. In other words, absolutely everything money could buy, he had it. And what Jesus is saying here then is that much more stunning. Is like, hey, Solomon's got nothing on nature, on flowers, and the beauty that they hold. And if God cares so wonderfully for flowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? And don't be concerned about what to eat and what to drink. Don't worry about such things. In other words, don't meditate on such things. These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers all over the world. But your Father already knows your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he'll give you everything you need. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. This will store up treasure for you in heaven. By the way, what Jesus is saying here isn't sell your houses today, live in a box, and give it all away. That's not what he's saying. He's just saying, because you are not so obsessed with money and possessions now, loosen up. Sell some of your stuff and help the people who need help. Because you probably have too much stuff because you're worried about losing your stuff. So lighten up with your stuff and help the world out. That's what he's getting at. And he's saying this will store up treasure for you in heaven, but he's not saying, this isn't transaction where he's saying, okay, for every dollar you give away in this life, it's going to go 100-fold in heaven. So you are building your mansion in heaven. I don't think that's at all what Jesus is saying. But I think what he is saying is that when we sow into this kingdom mindset, we're sowing into something much bigger than we are, something that sustains us in ways we can't even appreciate. In the purses of heaven, he says, never get old or develop holes. That's right. Your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it, and no moth can destroy it. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. So that last phrase, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be, and the first phrase on that slide are very much related. That's seeking the kingdom of God above all else. That's what I mean about meditating on the love of God and investing ourselves in that. When we do that, when we make that first, that is going to guide our thoughts, it's going to guide our hopes, it's going to guide our steps, everything that we do, our mouth, everything. Then so many other things come in line because we are choosing to be in the flow of the very Spirit of God. And when we are in the flow of the very Spirit of God, we know we're going to be buoyed. We know even if things get really bad, it's not going to be the end. And even if something should take us to the end, it's really not the end because we're tied into something eternal. It changes our entire perspective on life, our stuff, everything. And that's what Jesus was all about, was what does it mean to walk in lockstep with God? What does it mean for the Spirit of God to animate everything I do? Now, I blow it on a regular basis, so don't look at me like I've got this whole thing figured out, because ask my wife. She knows my humanity. No, not kidding. She knows my humanity better than anybody. And so we're all in process. We're all figuring out how do we live as better expressions of love. And we all have work to do. But that's the point, is investing ourselves in the very love of God ends up creating a very lovely life. And not just for us, but for everyone. So with that as the foundation, knowing that there's no shame, guilt going on here, that's not our MO. I don't think that was ever Jesus' MO. And it's not transactional, because I don't think that was Jesus' MO either. Then I want to just give you some metaphors to think about. But before we look at that next slide, I want to say two things. The first thing I want to say is, and by the way, I asked my praxis group Wednesday morning, for some feedback on things I ought to say, and I did it on the Wednesday evening as well. And I just asked them, hey, I'm going to be wrapping this thing up. what would you like me to make sure I say? And one of the things that came out, which is so helpful, and I would have forgotten if they hadn't have said it, even though I believe it and understand it, is some of us come into Crosswalk alone, even though we're not alone in life. We have a significant other, partner, whatever, and we don't have full control over what we do with our household income. And so you may have this great desire to do great things, but you know literally you're not the only one making that decision. And so I hear you on that. And I know that is truly a painful place to be. And I've talked to people who've been in that situation. It's hard. You see need, you see things you'd love to do, and you know there's plenty of money to do it, and yet you're hamstrung. And I get you. And so don't feel any shame, guilt on that. That's just reality. It's just, I get it. And you know, just do what you can. Do the best you can out of love and see where it goes. But no shame, no guilt on that. And the other thing has to do with Crosswalk as a worthy recipient. Now, I know I'd be a moron to say anything, but Crosswalk is a great place. But it's true. I mentioned last week, I think, or the week before, sometime in there, Lynn and I, you know, we're committed to giving to what God is doing here. And it, by far, is the largest receiver of our contributions, of our charitable contributions. I mean, by far, like tenfold. I mean, there's no contest. And it's because we believe that that's something deep in our spirit that we need to do. For one, I'll get to that in a moment. But it's also because this is a worthwhile place. I've gotten to know, because I'm involved in different things in the county, and I've gotten to know, you know, how do we look compared to other nonprofits, and what do we get done for the amount that we're asking? And I got to tell you, first from our own board of stewards, Lauren Haas, you know, was talking about this last Wednesday night. He was saying, man, there is no real fat here at Crosswalk. It's not like we pad this thing. And he's right. It's lean, very lean. And secondly, we get a ton done for not a lot of money. A ton. And so, in my opinion, you can feel really good about that we figured out how to be honorable with our campus and to do well in that, and we're learning more effective ways to help you and future crosswalkers develop their spiritual depth and understanding in creative ways, because we got to figure out new models on that. I think it's a worthwhile place. And my check's going here, and so I just want to say that not only do I think it's worthwhile, but there's also very high accountability here. Our Board of Stewards can look at any of our financials, and every month they see where we are, and they have access to our finance team. As you know, we look at the numbers every month to see every expense that goes out the door, where the incomes come. I mean, it is well viewed. In terms of security stuff, we have multiple eyes looking at the money coming in, so there's nobody that can slip some off the top. When checks are written, there are people looking on that to make sure that that's going where it is. And all the way through, there are security measures so that you can feel confident that you're not getting ripped off, or that we're doing a bad thing with the money that you entrust with Crosswalk. So just wanted to make that clear, because that could be a really important question for you to ask. Like, well, is this even a good place to think about that? So with that said, let's take a look at some metaphors to talk about on the next slide. The first one's the fair share idea. The only thing I think this is really good for is shrinking a big number. So let me just talk about that briefly. I think, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's fair at all. That's why I put it in quotes. Fair share is simply like this. Our budget for this coming year is $360,000. Let's say, just to use a round number, let's say we have 200 households that want to contribute toward Crosswalk's future. And that's probably about right. It's pretty close to that when you count members and then fans of Crosswalk who contribute. So what does that boil down to? That means per household about $1,800, which boils down to about $150 a month. That gets us to that number. Now, here's the deal. I don't think fair share is fair at all, because there are some families at Crosswalk that $150 is taking food off the table. I don't want that. I don't think God wants that. I think that's inappropriate. And there are some families in our church that, $150 a month is a joke. That's absolute chump change. That's an almost non-gift. That's without thinking kind of level. And so it's not fair in that regard. It's sort of fair when my kids were in band to think about, all the band members had to come up with their fair share to pay for what was needed. And that kind of made sense. But even then, the board of the band booster club knew that there were some families that couldn't afford it. And so they just sort of didn't pay attention to that fair share because they knew it wasn't fair. Interestingly, even in that context, there were people with great means living in gated communities that wouldn't write the check for $800. I was like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? So this tension is there, and it's not fair. So the only reason I give you the fair share model to think about, one is to shrink the number so you have an idea what that looks like. And for some of you who are doing okay, somebody asked me this a number of years ago, a young couple in our church. And she just said, hey, we want to contribute, but we have no idea what that even looks like. And so that at least gives you some kind of way to think about it. And it's just one metaphor of a few. The next one has to do with the baseball diamond. This is good for process and progression. The idea of it is this, that to get in the game, you need to get on base. And to get on base is to give something. Something. And maybe the something is hardly anything, so it's like you got walked, or somebody made you do it, and so you got hit with a pitch or something. Or maybe some of you were more intentional and skillful about it, and you actually hit the ball and you got on base, and so it's just given something to be in the game. And it matters. It matters to you. It matters to your walk with God, which I'll get to in a moment. But it matters. So it gets you in the game, and you're a part of our machine here that is serving so many people all throughout the week. Second base is a little different than that. Second base is not just looking at yourself, but looking at your family, your household, and just asking the question, okay, it's not enough just to give something. Am I giving a reasonable amount that is reflective of my income level, but also providing, giving back to the church what it's requiring for our family to be here. So it's just sort of like kind of a fair share idea, but a more nuanced way of thinking about that, covering our bases. Third base is beyond self-thinking, where you're not thinking about just what does it take to keep me here, but you're asking the question, I know that there are people that Crosswalk is going to reach. And those people who we hope to reach someday with very good news, it's going to be a long time before they put anything in the plate. So I want to cover them. I want to make sure they have a chair here. When we bought these chairs 7 years ago or 8 years ago, that was part of the idea. These were purchased by some of you, and some of you purchased them not just for yourself, but I remember one couple bought a whole row of chairs because they wanted to buy enough for the friends they hope to get here someday. That's pretty cool. So that's kind of a third base mentality. And a home run mentality is thinking not just about yourself, not just about some of the people that we might reach someday, but it's actually thinking beyond our life. Like, what does it mean for us to think in terms of long-term legacy kinds of things? And I'll get to that in a few moments. The helpful thing about this, the unhelpful thing about this metaphor is that we need to celebrate every base. We need to celebrate every piece. And you need to realize that there are going to be seasons of your life when a first base some way is the best you can do. Hey, our economy, you never know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen in the job market. Our housing levels here in Napa are prohibitive. They are suffocating people. And that has to be taken into account. So that's a real thing. So some of you, to hit a single, man, I celebrate that, and I thank you for that. And there are going to be seasons of your life, perhaps, where you'll be able to do a triple and feel so good about that. And you'll be in that zone, you'll feel great, and then something hits the fan, way out of your control. And then you're like, oh, man, all I can do is a single. But you know what? I still celebrate the single. And we all do. So it helps us to know that we're not always going to hit a single, a triple, or a double, or a home run, because seasons in life change that way. But it gives us sort of a parameter to think and categorize different things. Does that make sense? The next one has to do with percentages. And this is a really good thing apart from legalism. Now, the 10% thing has become a legalism danger for a lot of people. Because that number, 10%, I grew up hearing that all the time, and it was like, well, 10% or you are a less than Christian. You don't really believe or trust in God enough. And I don't think that's helpful at all, for a lot of reasons. One, because of different people's stages in life and what they're able to do, 10% is prohibitive. And literally, you're not going to make rent if you're doing 10%. And that has nothing to do with faith in God. It has everything to do with how things pencil out. It's not possible for a lot of people to do that. But here's a beautiful thing about percentages, is when you think things through and you're looking at your whole situation, your income source and all that stuff, and you're figuring out where things go, first of all, in doing that, it forces you to create some level of budget, which is a very good thing to do. And when you create a budget, you're actually thinking to yourself, well, I really want to do this in terms of, expressing my faith and being a part of this thing. And so that number, whatever that is, you're looking at that and thinking, well, if I'm going to be comfortable doing that, it's going to mean I need to modify some of these things over here. You know what that means? That means you're going to be a better financial steward of what you already have. And when you're a better financial steward just for your own personal life, you're going to feel a lot better about your life, because money stresses us out. But if you've got it kind of planned out and figured out, you're going to be in a lot better place. So that regular idea of this is what I'm shooting for is actually, I think that is the genius of it, is it forces so many other things in your life to get straightened out. So whatever that percentage is, figure that out, and I strongly recommend that you do that. And I highly recommend, for your sake and for Crosswalk's sake, to set it up as an automatic thing. The first time that I set that up, where I did it through my bank, Chase Bank had this, all banks have this, where you can set up your online bill stuff, and it'll send a check to wherever. And so the first time that I did that, and it was a regular thing, I felt really uncomfortable. You know why? Because at that time in the church's life, we had chairs and rows or pews or whatever it was at that time, and we would always pass an offering plate. I would never put anything in it because it was coming in from the bank. So it was so uncomfortable. I felt so guilty. I'm the pastor of the church, and it looks like I'm not giving a dime, when it wasn't true. But now I'm at a place where it's like, oh yeah, I've got Crosswalk covered, and I never have to think about it. I recently switched. I did the Realm thing that we're talking about, and I got away from that. And I did that just because it's so cool and so user-friendly, and it's so easy. So if you can do that, it helps you, because then you're doing something for something you care about. It really helps Crosswalk. One of the first things I tell new board members as they come into their season of leadership is I say, get ready for a financial roller coaster ride. And some of that can't be avoided because life happens. But we know through the course of a year not to get too excited about really big fat months where we have way more income than we do expenses, and don't get too freaked out when it goes the other direction. But the more automated we get that way, the more stable and the better leadership we can give as a church. Now, one other thing on this percentage thing, and this is to tweak things in a different direction. A lot of times we look at 10% as, oh, that's the high water mark, and if I can hit that, then done. But what if it's not? What if that's really not the point or the heart of it? There's a Christian leader in America. His name's Rick Warren. He started a church called Saddleback down in Southern California. It's mammoth. It's influenced great things in the world. And Rick Warren is deeply devoted to the poor and doing great things and all that. Well, he wrote this book, which actually was instrumental in the health of this church at a particular time, called The Purpose-Driven Life. And he also had a corollary, The Purpose-Driven Church. That one came first. And those two books, I don't like the theology of them all that much anymore. I've kind of grown in a different direction, but it's still really good and helps so many people. And it sold a gazillion copies. And an amazing amount of wealth came to Rick Warren. And you know what he decided to do, which I think is so cool? It was like 10, 15 years into his ministry there. And he decided to pay the church back for every dollar that they had ever paid him in salary. Yeah, an enormous check. And then he decided to do a reverse tithe, where he chose to live on 10% and give away 90. That is beautiful. That is countercultural and counterintuitive. And as far as I know, Rick's doing okay. And he's influencing beautiful things all around the world. So don't limit yourself. If you are in a place of means, don't limit yourself. Don't go legal on the 10%, like that's the point. But really evaluate out of your love for what God is doing. What is enough? And what are you able to do beyond yourself to make a difference in the world? All right, the next thing has to do with being all in. Most of you know that I did my doctoral work back in 2005-06 on soteriology, which is a fancy word for salvation. So I am Dr. Salvation. That'd be a pretty good Facebook name, maybe. Anyway, the biggest thing that I got out of that, did somebody just make fun of me somewhere? All right. The biggest thing out of that is that salvation is not to come, it's now. And from cover to cover, the idea of salvation is not about afterlife, it's about your life now. Becoming more whole, becoming more connected, all because of a relationship with God. All the things in our belief statement, all those different pieces, those are descriptive of when those things are together and we're fostering growth in all of those areas, we experience salvation coming online. So this isn't just to say the magic words to get your butt to heaven someday. Salvation is so much bigger than that. And here's what I want to tell you. Salvation is whole life. It's for every facet of your life, your emotional life, your intellectual life, your work life, your key relationships, and your money. When you choose to compartmentalize your finances from your relationship with God, especially knowing the danger that we have of idolizing our money and our wealth, you are robbing yourself of the very salvation you desire, of the very wholeness you want. It's like you're putting handcuffs on yourself, and because it's not an equal playing field, not all things are equal in terms of how we compartmentalize, and I would suggest that for most of us, if not all of us, money commands an overwhelming part of our thinking and psyche. So to leave that out robs you of the very presence and life of God that God dreams for you, and that will lead to beautiful things. So some people, it's not always from the right place. Some people, they say, man, Pete, I literally can't put food on the table, so I can't contribute literally $1, but I'm going to contribute time and other things that I can do. And in those very limited situations, hey, thank you. Thank you. That's so awesome. But some of us trick ourselves and we say, well, I don't really want to give any money, so I'll just give a little more time. Hear me clearly. I appreciate your gift of time, but you are robbing yourself. You are saying to yourself, to God, who loves you, who is with you, that I don't want you to touch that part of me. It robs you. So salvation is meant to be whole life. So allow, like we did in that prayer exercise, allow God access to your whole life, including your finances, and see how God will help shape that, because God has your best interest in mind. It's a good thing. And it's worked for Lynn and I. We're getting by fine, but there's a lot of things we didn't do because we chose to give generously here, and we're fine with it. It's okay. I'd rather, at the end of my days, look back and say, "Wow, we were able to help so many people," rather than take many vacations or that whatever. It's just, it works. I don't know. I don't want to beat that too much. The last thing I want to talk about has to do with legacy. This is a touchy one, so let's just do it. The question I have for you is, will your values be expressed in your very last gift? We live in an unprecedented time in church history. We really do. Church historians have been saying this for years, and it's not like it's going to be done next year, but we're in an in-between time of what has been for many centuries into what is coming, and we don't know what the what is coming even looks like yet. The one big difference is that faith passing on to the next generation is no given. And that is a weird reality we're seeing in very hard statistics right now. It used to be that if you grew up in the church, you would raise your kids in the church, and they might fritter away for a little while, but as soon as they had kids, they'd be right back into church. That day is gone. And not only are they not going to church, they are not thinking faith at all, not in the way it was expressed. And for those of you who have been so faithful over so many years, a tragedy happens, and I've seen this happen many times over my almost 25 years in ministry. I remember one family in the Midwest that they did good things in their life. They were faithful. Everything was from the right motivation and all that. And then when they passed, their estate naturally went to their children, none of whom gave a rip about the church or the things of God at all. And it was like their value that was so central to their life at the very end, their last gift, did not represent the most important thing in their heart and their life. And that's tragic. But you, while you're alive, can do something about that. Now, I'm not standing before you, to make an announcement to my daughter and my son, who might watch this later, that they're cut out of the will now. Nothing is coming your way. That's not it at all. That's also incongruent, right? I love my kids. I want to do whatever I can to help them, and yet I know that I want my estate to also reflect my deepest values, which is the kingdom of God kind of stuff. And that matters, my friends. It matters, and it matters for a very long time. Now, sometimes this happens and churches get estates, and that helps fund things for a very long time. Sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes they happen in other ways. Like Stephen Corley, if I can pick on him. I asked for permission on this, so it's okay. But, this is kind of a reverse of what I was saying. Because Steve's dad never connected with the church a lot. It wasn't as central as it is to Stephen for a range of reasons. And that's too bad, because I think I would have loved to know him, and I think he would have loved Crosswalk for sure. But for whatever reason, that wasn't a part of where he was at. But when Stephen's father passed, and Stephen got part of the estate, of course, Stephen wanted to do a legacy gift for his dad. And so we had, up until a couple years ago, a time capsule here at the church. Not one of these that you bury, but an actual space that was a time capsule from 1956. It was our kitchen right over here. That thing hadn't been touched. It may have been painted a bunch, but it hadn't been touched for so long. And we know that that gets used all the time. And so Stephen said, can I do a gift in honor of my father to redo that kitchen? And because he provided the funds for the stuff, and we had another guy, Jim Delasanta, who donated his time, as well as Ted and with electrical stuff, and Ben helping him with that. It was a team effort. But because of that, that legacy gift is going to, I can't tell you how many, literally over time, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people are going to be served because of that gift. That's amazing. Another thing like that happened where a very faithful parent passed, and part of that will, the estate came to a particular person in our church. And since Jenny just stood up, because it relates to her a little bit, this woman wanted to do something for youth. And so they gave us money to redo our youth space for a project that she didn't even have kids. And now, because that person made a legacy gift, now today, not only do we use it for ourselves, but Teens Connect, through Jenny's leadership, is going to serve who knows how many youth in our area that desperately need the help that she's going to be able to provide. So that's one of, now you can go. So that's one of the, cast your ballot on the way out, by the way. So that's an idea of that. And this church has a great history of that. This was, how many of you remember these? There aren't many of you left who might. Curtis, I figured you might. These go back in time when this church was just starting to build its campus. And this thing says, First Baptist Church Napa. That's our corporate name. We still are First Baptist Church, the very first one in Napa. And the idea was you'd put your little offering in this for the building campaign. Now, a lot of the people who put money in these, they passed. And you are here because of them. These bricks were built because they decided to do something beyond themselves. Some of that was a state gift. To this day, you can go in our education wing and in the nursery. If you're picking up kids in the nursery later, look at some of the bricks, because you'll see a little tiny name card type thing on the corner of some of the bricks. That indicates people who bought that brick. It's pretty cool. So that your kids could be here, so that you could be here. The question is simply, what are you doing that's going to outlive yourself? And knowing that you've experienced the love of God, you want to express the love of God throughout all of your life with all of your stuff, how do you do that in a faithful way that is beyond you, so that generations to come can experience the good news that we are? That's all I got, except this, the last word from the Apostle Paul, who got it, who did all of this stuff, who nailed it, who if Paul wouldn't have done his stuff, we probably wouldn't even be here. There's a good chance the faith would have died out in some way. But Paul, an unlikely guy who was fairly legalistic in his thinking before his life was changed by the love of God, then became enamored with the love of God, so he couldn't stop talking about the love of God. And to his favorite church in Philippi, he says this on the last screen. He says, I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do everything through Christ, who gives me strength. At the moment, I have all I need and more. I am generously supplied with the gifts you sent me. They are a sweet-smelling sacrifice that is acceptable and pleasing to God. And this same God who takes care of me will supply all your needs from his glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus. This thing has been done. This thing has happened to millions of people over time. And I'm wondering where you are in your relationship to this. And I'm asking you, as a crosswalker, and so much more importantly, as a person in relationship with God, how have you worked out your relationship with stuff based on your love of God and God's love for you? Not out of any shame or guilt or legalism, but simply because you can't help yourself. Because that's the dream. Let's pray together. So God, I pray that our relationship with you will just overflow with love. That somehow, maybe today through the music that we already had, or as we move out of here, we'll just be continually reminded that the foundation of our very lives, because of who you are, is love. And the more we build on that reality, a love that can never run dry, won't run dry, the more we give love away, the more there is. May that continue to inform our minds and our hands and our steps and our checking accounts. That our love would be expressed tangibly, and that many more people, way beyond ourselves, way beyond even our lifetime, would hear the very good news that they are deeply and profoundly and unconditionally loved because we loved them. Because we loved them with our stuff. So God, may your Spirit help us figure that out to a place we feel good about it, generous with it. And we do it all because we love you, because you love us. We lift this up in Jesus' name. Amen. And that is the end of our service. So I'm glad you're here today. If you have any comments for us, any offering, whatever, please put it in those things provided. And we will let you know as soon as the ballots are counted what the results of today's meeting were. And we thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.